Hello, my name is Rebecca Jahor, and this is my section of the Module 5 group presentation. I'll be looking at the second reading, reflecting on Urban Indian, a documentary on the work done by John Simmermeyer. John is a Coharie individual from North Carolina and Navajo from Mexico. A quick summarization on the video is that John is a facilitator for a program in Baltimore where he runs a culture course for Indigenous individuals and youth to help inspire Indigenous youth to understand their culture in the urban setting. The program is placed in Baltimore, a large city in the United States, and John quickly states to the listener that all the Indigenous individuals in Baltimore come from a different background. They bring a different Indigenous community and tribal perspective with them. And this program, he's looking to foster that and bring together a united but different sense of Indigenous urban identity. The public often sees urbanized settings for Indigenous individuals as an opportunity for even more assimilation in today's society. However, I think John is really taking advantage of a situation to bring together even more cultural identities and to allow groups and programs like he runs to provide urban individuals an opportunity to learn about their history and to take advantage of the other Indigenous communities and individuals around them to build kind of a new community in an urban setting and continue to allow their heritage to flourish. The program John is offering is a culture class for youth in Baltimore. These individuals have the opportunity to learn how to drum, dance, sing, and make a lot of friends along the way. In the video, you see lots of laughter and smiles from lots of youth and other individuals that come in and help aid these youth in their journey to discovering their own heritage as well. This opportunity builds connections with the communities around them, Indigenous and non, and helps Indigenous individuals at a young age show off their connection to the land. However, you'll notice in the video all the youth look like they come from different backgrounds, different cultural identities, reflecting on the key aspect we mentioned in the last slide, that Indigenous people in urbanized situations come from all different walks of life and all different tribes and communities. That means they can have different multicultural identities and different visual appearances as well. One of the large quotes that stood out to me in the video that builds on this aspect of different identities, of Indigenous identities in an urban setting is, "There is no one person that looks like an Indian person." As we know, urban settings offer a variety of different multicultural identities. John's idea that Indigenous in the urban setting can look different and come from different communities and offer different values and futures only aids in the preservation of Indigenous cultures. Focusing on the children, John goes around the circle and asks the children, "Why do you dance?" Many of them talk about the joy and the happiness it brings them at such a young age to reconnect with their history and their ancestors. John references dancing in a more modern time as a type of medicine to heal their families and to offer for their communities. The group truly gives an opportunity to children in an urbanized setting to understand where they come from and that their culture is still alive with them today. Continuing this learning to the course and the information we've learned so far, I like to think about a past discussion we actually had about the supports offered in an urbanized setting for Indigenous people. In many of our discussions, we talked about supports in the health pros, but not necessarily in the saving cultural identity sense. John is getting to the root and allowing Indigenous youth, even in an urban setting, to reconnect with the land that potentially their families have moved distance away. This ties together a bond and a sense of belonging in one's community, even if they don't tend to live around the people that they have ancestral ties to. Even though this opportunity might not be directly health supporting, I do think it fosters a better mental health future for these youth in an urbanized setting, building connections with their communities and a larger Indigenous community in Baltimore. I think it would be amazing if this program was mirrored in other large cities. This program also creates somewhat of a net for Indigenous youth as they bond with each other over their ancestral heritage. Meanwhile, the program in general just creates a great opportunity for Indigenous youth in the city. Now looking at a second point we've covered through the readings and course knowledge so far is the loss of Indigenous identity through urbanization and the ongoing assimilation we see through Indigenous identity through assimilation. We've seen in some of the past readings that in the United States, Indigenous communities have actually been forced to move into the city for quote-unquote work opportunities. Programs like John's directly combat this sense of cultural identity loss in the cities because it starts right at the root. Children. It creates an inspiration to learn about one's cultural identity and gives the opportunity for teachings like dancing, singing, drumming. Many of these teachings would be given by one's community, their grandparents, their family, but as they've urbanized into a situation without these mentors, John's program is incredibly valuable. He's creating space for preserving Indigenous culture in an urbanized setting, and Baltimore would be a great example, and this program could be spread across cities worldwide. Looking at these week's questions, I'd like to focus on how are urban Native American identities and communities retribalized and tribal communities urbanized? As you probably think, this question's perfect for this reading. Understanding this question in the sense of John's program creates an understanding of Indigenous in an urban sense, refinding their historical ties and their ancestral connection to other individuals through activities like singing, dancing. Powwows are often referenced in this video, increasing this more sense of culture and belonging through Indigenous communities and tribes. John mentions in the video that he enjoys learning and teaching others about their right to sing and dance and drum because at one time this right was taken away from them. That's right, Indigenous activities like singing, dancing, and drumming, and just entertainment in general and their ways of life were banned. They were banned by the government as forced assimilation and a byproduct of colonization. An individual in the city never loses their heritage. They don't lose the fact that they're an Indigenous individual. However, they can lose their tie to the community. John's program offers an opportunity to build a new community. A community of individuals in the city who have different Indigenous backgrounds. However, they all have an ancestral connection to performing tasks like singing, dancing, drumming, and enjoying in many other teachings that their ancestors once taught them. John is offering an opportunity to put a direct end to the loss of Indigenous identity in Baltimore. Looking at the second part of this question, we must think how tribal communities are urbanized. John states at the beginning of the video that he is from a tribal community. To understand this question, I had to research personally what a tribal community is. While the terms tribal and Indigenous people definitely overlap, through my research it seems that tribal is more focusing on people of political, social, and legal disadvantages of Indigenous history in America. Reflecting on that understanding, tribal communities were urbanized through examples like in the past reading, the Indian Relocation Act of 1956. As we've discussed in the voice threads, the act was completely a force of assimilation by decreasing the amount of support Indigenous people got on their reserved lands. They were offered a small opportunity to move to these large cities like Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, Cleveland, Seattle, Oklahoma, and have a chance at some sort of trades education, up to 4 weeks, so 1 month of financial support, and potentially tools for their new trade. Overall, this doesn't seem like a great opportunity for leaving your whole family. However, with the funding depleting on the reserves as being cut off by the government, many Indigenous people had very little choice. Today in the States, we see very similar occurrences. As tribal communities get less and less supports, many are forced to move out into the city, leaving their community behind and create a new life and new identity for themselves. However, finally, programs like John allows individuals to support their Indigenous identity while being in the city. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope you enjoyed the John Sayermeyer video.